Up first on India Tonight, it's about Rahul Gandhi, who wrote an editorial in a national daily, and he offered what he says is a new deal for Indian businesses. We're going to play out some of that, what he's written, the quotes, and those are going to be visible on the screen as part of the discussion that is going to unfold. But Rahul, for the most part, accusing the government of starving talented people of capital. And he says India is creating monopolies. So the question is this: is Rahul simply trying to shed his anti-business image ahead of the Maharashtra elections? And where is this new business deal? And does India need one, as his party now, for the third time in a row, has failed to get seats in triple digits? Let's open up this debate. Joining us on this discussion is Lloyd Mathias. He is independent director. Also, advocate Kapil Madan is with us, along with founder and economist Mitali Nikore. Great to have you all with us this evening. And we will see additions to the panel as we go along. But Kapil Madan, to you first, this article by Rahul Gandhi, which is called A New Deal for Indian Business. Is this just about Rahul trying to shed his anti-corporate image at a time that the financial capital and the country's wealthiest state is going to polls, or do you see more than that? Kapil, that was for you.
Sorry, I lost your voice. Can you come again, please?
Certainly. Kapil, at the outset, I was trying to get from you what do you think this article is about. This article, which is called A New Deal for Indian Business, is it particularly designed to help Rahul Gandhi shed that anti-corporate image? Because the financial capital is going to the polls, the country's wealthiest state is going to the polls. Is it imperative on him to shed that image?
Let me first, make a small correction in your opening remark. It is not anti-capital. It is anti-crony capitalism. If you look at the article in the right context and the right narrative, all that you get to understand and comprehend is that he's raising important issues. He's raising issues wherein he's highlighting how a particular conglomerate or two such conglomerate are getting most of the business opportunities and expansion, while on the other hand we have other business industry people from business industry, people from different companies who are striving hard to make their mark, and they have made their mark. But yes, if you look at it from the government policy perspective, it appears that the policy is made in a manner wherein only two big established players are able to get the maximum opportunities, and that's where you don't have a level playing field wherein you ensure or you give opportunity to other market players to emerge or to grow.
So that I understand as far as your reading of this article and your takeaways. But Lloyd, you see Rahul Gandhi describing himself as pro-jobs and pro-business and pro-innovation, also pro-competition. But beyond what he's claiming over here in this article, have you seen this in evidence in any of the Congress-ruled states, for example? Because it's what he's projecting. But has he been able to put actions into the kind of words he's projecting in the article?
Thanks for having me on your show, Vikram. I think the first point I'd like to make is that this is a welcome move or a positive move from Rahul Gandhi, moving away from, shall we say, random sloganeering, the usual rants against the two big groups, Ambani, Adani, the Sood Ki Sarkar. I think for the first time, this is, shall we say, a slightly more pointed and direct criticism and the warning of monarchies, oligarchies, and dominant players, which I think is fair, is timely, and is relevant. So I think that part is good. I think what I missed clearly, and I went through that op-ed in the Indian Express, was what is the alternate plan? What does his party, what is their economic vision for India? What do they hope to do to make doing business easier, to grow risk capital, to get a lot more entrepreneurs in? I think just kind of waving a red flag, which to some extent is valid, I think does not solve the problem. And clearly, as the leader of the opposition, I think it's incumbent to actually present an alternate plan. So what is it? If you believe that two business groups are getting a disproportionate share of India's economy, why is it so? Are there not so transparent measures in which these licenses are being given out? Is it not a fair auction? Is it not a level playing field? I think the importance is to look at some of the details and make criticism very much more relevant, as opposed to generally waving a red flag and blaming the opposition. I think that's the point where Mr. Gandhi would be better off focusing on. Right now, it still seems like an extension of the standard ranks, two big groups. And I think really the Congress party and Rahul Gandhi ought to present what they think should be a proper and a more mature business model, actually prevent the creation of some monopolies. And even outside of the two groups, I think we really have the danger. If you look at telecom today, we are almost down to two players. If you look at the world of aviation, India is a large market and we really have two active players of consequence. I think there are real concerns, but I wish the article went beyond just kind of raising a red flag, but giving some direction in terms of where the economy is slipping up and what needs to be managed better.
The more economy-related questions, and I'll direct them to Mitali in a moment, but Smita Gupta is also joining us, a political commentator. Smita, the entire caste census approach that Rahul Gandhi brings up, he's done that in this particular article that has been published as well, Jitni Abadi Utna Hak. I want to ask you, within that entire ambit of what he's projecting, the importance of the caste census, does that leave enough scope for capitalism and jobs and growth within that?
I don't think Rahul Gandhi is anti-business or companies. But what he is saying is that when the market is dominated by big companies, I'm not an economist, but it's very simple. If you squeeze out the smaller players, then it creates a kind of lopsided view of the economy. I mean, there are some people who are making a lot of money, whereas the smaller traders, the smaller players, they are squeezed out. So this is part of, his general worldview, where the caste census comes in, where he's talking about everybody getting a fair share. Because till everybody gets a fair share, the country cannot possibly progress. You can't just have, a top the Adanis and the Ambanis and other such big companies progressing and the small kirane ka dukan, all of them getting squeezed out. So that is basically what he's saying in a nutshell. And that doesn't make him anti-business. Or if he says that the big banks, instead of giving loans only to those people, the rich people, and we have seen, there was a time I remember when if you just walk down Parliament Street, all the public sector banks, they had huge NPAs and those.
Didn't much of that happen under the Congress regime, Smita?
Yeah, it has. So I'm not saying that he's talking about a particular worldview. This is his worldview. He was not in charge then.
Right. No, but now, like Lloyd Mathias is also pointing out, we are trying to find solutions if there is this problem that some of you at least accept there is. So do tell us, Mitali, on the one hand, you have Rahul Gandhi talking about government policies. According to him, they favor only a few business houses. And yet, on the other hand, this caste census, it's about putting a sense of birthright over resources. We're talking about reservations and such. Isn't there an inherent contradiction over here? How will capitalists operate in a country where merit is thrown out of the window?
Yeah, thanks, Vikram, for bringing me into this discussion. And I think, at the end of the day, first, let's take a step back and look at India's economic evolution over the last 50 years. If we look at the first 10 or 20 years of our economic growth, a lot of that was about the commanding heights of the economy, was about investing in large state-run enterprises, which gave a foundation to the economy. And at that time, those state-run enterprises were actually monopolies. What happened in the years following liberalization and following the 1991 liberalization reforms, because of which we have the economy that exists today, was to actually break up those large enterprises and do a lot of disinvestment, an effort that the government continues to do till today in order to create the private sector, capital and markets that we see functioning almost without the government intervention in many of the sectors. And the latest example of which was this disinvestment of Air India, and almost like a ghar vapsi for Air India, so to speak, when the Tatas, took it over. So I think, the point which he's making is valid in the sense of, are small businesses struggling? Yes, small businesses are struggling, but have they struggled only in the current dispensation or in the current administration? Absolutely not. Small businesses have been struggling for the last 20 to 25 years. And have some of the recent policies actually helped small businesses? I would say without doubt, yes. Because when you have schemes like the Mudra Yojana, when you have more digitization of access to capital, when you have more bank accounts being set up in rural areas, this actually leads to more financial inclusion. So we have evidence, and we have clear data showing that financial inclusion has improved. It is today easier to start a business than it was 10 years ago, and at the end of the day these policies have borne fruit. However, having said that, yes, there is a risk of increasing income inequality in the country, and that is something on which we need policy action.
But also, in the midst of this debate on whether India is creating enough jobs or not, Rahul Gandhi is pointing at monopolistic practices as one of the reasons why we aren't generating enough jobs. He claims that monopolistic practices are crowding out the SMEs. Traditionally, they've generated substantial employment. And he's emphasizing that these large conglomerates benefit from policy favoritism that places the smaller players at a disadvantage and makes it difficult for them to thrive, to contribute towards job creation. What do you say to that, Lloyd Mathias?
I think the danger of crony capitalism and income inequality is real, right? And as an economy grows, I think there is every likelihood of that happening. And to that extent, I think the article is on point. Where I differentiate, where I disagree, I think is two parts. I think one is we have this hangover right from the 60s, the 70s, in a sense, Mitali referred to it, when Bollywood, in a sense, stereotyped, industrialists as unscrupulous, right? Anyone who makes money is bad. I think we have to get away from that. Making money per se is not bad. In a growing economy, there is bound to be some who are going to be ultra successful, and there'll be some that throw out of the way. Some of the best known industrialists in the 70s and 80s today don't figure among India's top 10 industrialists, and that's the nature of capitalism. I think the issue where I have a bit of a problem is to understand what are the things that need immediate course correction and what could be done differently. To this government's credit, I would say things like Startup India have helped. I think the focus on risk capital in the last decade, not necessarily because of the government, but through venture capital to private equity, has resulted in a lot more new generation entrepreneurs. Today, there are young, successful business owners in India who weren't, sons of rich parents, so to speak. And some of these are businesses not just successful in India, but on the verge of going global, and that needs to be encouraged. I think where we have to watch out for, and to what extent, to that extent, Rahul Gandhi is on point, is that there is a danger of a lot of the growth coming out of few companies which corner a disproportionate share, and these companies using regulatory influence to advantage to keep out competitors, either to squeeze out small players or indeed even to keep out large foreign players. And I think that's an area where if India starts being seen as a country of oligarchies, where a couple of players are able to manipulate policy to their advantage, I think that is a real danger. And to that extent, I think we have to watch out. Other than that, I think we have to just look at what are the areas on which we can grow the economy. And as leader of the opposition, I certainly hope and I wish that the opposition spells out what are the things this government needs to do differently from what they are doing right now.
And just in a way, trying to understand what's really at play, because India is trying to become a global economic superpower. And on our route to be able to do that, isn't it imperative that certain Indian companies will grow exponentially? Kapil? Kapil, you'll need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Vikram. Yes, when we are moving towards progress and growth, there would be some sectors, some industries which would, do, well and outperform the other. But at the same time, what we need to ensure is that we, give and provide level playing field to all the players in the market. And let me just give you an example of, what has happened in the last 10 years. If you look at, how many telecom industries were there in 2010 or maybe 20 till 2014, you would be amazed. There were a lot of players. Now, if you'll ask a question, where are they and what are your options? So you end up only with two companies as opposed to close to 6 or 7 companies that were operating in 2010 and 2014. So what does that signify? I mean, if your corporates and if your industries or if your companies are going out of business, they are exiting the business, what kind of growth are you signifying? And yet the number of service consumers insofar as telecom sector is concerned has grown. So it means that the most of the opportunities and the most of the business is concentrated now in the hands of only 2 players as opposed to so many players that we had prior to 2014. And if you look at the data in the auto sector, you will find examples where many companies were not able to do well in India, foreign companies, and they had to make an exit. There are so many indicators and so many instances where that has happened. So my only point is that yes, while we should become a superpower and we should grow at an exponential rate, but at the same time, that should not happen at the expense where our people or the companies who are not given level playing field are forced to compete with an entity or with an enterprise which has some sort of a policy advantage or favoritism by other.
Indeed, indeed. But Smita Gupta, just trying to understand how capitalism and governments today are working. Trump being branded as pro-business today. Is that how we define governments? Either pro-business or pro-common man? Is that the route that we are taking now?
No, I don't think so. If you're talking about Rahul Gandhi, in the case of Trump, yes, he is seen as big business. And we have seen that Elon Musk, who sort of funded his campaign to a very, very large extent. Yesterday, we saw his shares went up by 14%. So, I mean, he's probably made, made the money that he gave Trump. We are talking about, in the context of what Rahul Gandhi said, and India. I think what Rahul Gandhi is, he is certainly not anti-business, but as the previous speaker just said, the idea of opening up the economy was that there would be a level playing field, that anybody who was enterprising would be able to make the money. That level playing field is again, we are seeing that it's disappearing. So that is what he's saying, that any government needs to pay attention to that. The banks need to pay attention to that. The government needs to pay attention to that. And if you don't mind, I would like to get back to that subject of merit and caste. The point is that today, if many of us are doing well, and we belong to an upper caste, it is not simply because of our essential merit. It is because of generations of people behind us who were educated.
Right.
For those people who are entering the market, who are first generation educated people, things are far more difficult. You know that. I mean,
it is.
We all know that. And that Rahul Gandhi is therefore, in the same way, through the caste census, trying to create a level playing field.
Let me take that across to Mitali. Mitali, is there a difference in creating jobs in the organized and the unorganized sectors in a big way? Because I was just looking at the EPFO data, and they've been adding new members consistently. The August data is indicating that most of these individuals are joining the organized workforce. They are mostly youth. They are primarily first-time job seekers, something that Smita Gupta is talking about.
Absolutely. No, I fully agree with Smita ma'am when she talks about the fact that it's always harder for the marginalized communities to enter the workforce in any way, especially the organized sector workforce, as is harder for women I mean, we've had this discussion many times, Vikram, of the low female labor force participation rate. And I was actually quite upset to see that, in the article, Rahul Gandhi never spoke about the fact that the proportion of women entrepreneurs has actually not increased in the country at all in the last, 10 years or even 15 years. So successive governments have tried to bring, marginalized groups into the organized sector, into the, entrepreneurship space. And it's much harder to be an entrepreneur or to be in the organized sector and get a job in the organized sector than it is to be in the unorganized sector. So the EPFO data you're talking about, that definitely there is an increase, because you are seeing government jobs sort of increasing, and that EPFO bracket is 15,000 rupees a month. But the bracket which Rahul Gandhi is referring to is actually the startup segment. And he's saying that the startup segment is the one which is not getting the kind of funding, financing, access to markets, and access to networks in order to set up their enterprises, to which I actually do not agree. I think a lot of people in the startup segment are today getting access to capital, because the amount of capital that is available to the Indian, youth, educated youth who are ready to start enterprises is much more today than it was 10 years ago. But however, having said that, I also want to respond.
Yes.
Sorry, just one point, Vikram, to respond to your point about job creation.
Yes.
There was a study that the Economic Survey had done in 2021, and they actually found that job creation in large enterprises was actually much more than the job creation in SMEs. So, it is not a bad thing to have large enterprises in a growing economy, so long as everyone is playing by the same rules. And that is something to
To
which
create
there
that
can be
level
no
playing field,
disagreement.
of course, that's what we're saying, and there could be different routes to be able to achieve at that point. But since we are an evolving economy, Lloyd Mathias, Gandhi is pointing out that monopolies reduce competition, which he says it is essential for this competition is very important to foster innovation, he says. That point is taken. Fair pricing, all of that. Without competition, he says, dominant firms can set higher prices, they can impact consumers, decrease the diversity that we have in our economy. But when we say we are an economy that thrives on domestic demand, does that put the argument in Rahul's favor on this count, at least as far as where he's positioning himself in terms of what it brings to the table and what he is suggesting?
I think he's right to the extent that any economy will be robust only if it's fueled by good, strong domestic demand. And as a nation of 1.4 billion, I think that's absolutely important. Having said which, I think unlike a comparison of, say, 3 or 4 decades ago, I think it's difficult to ensure that companies only stay strong and robust within national boundaries. Today, any large sector, say automobiles or any such sector, you need to have companies that are globally competitive. If you look at India's top 5 automotive companies, there are 2 Indian companies, but there are 3 global companies who are part of it, like Suzuki, which is the dominant partner of Maruti Suzuki. So I think you have to recognize that and that's how great companies are built. If you look at back at the 90s and 2000s, the General Motors and the Ford, they grew as great global companies on the back of a strong domestic US market. Similarly, in Korea, you look at LG and Samsung. I mean, they grew out of a strong domestic market. Today, their global volumes are far in excess of the domestic volumes. So I think we can't look at it purely as an internal measure. The second point, and there I slightly disagree from Kapil, is that the process of mergers, acquisitions, and consolidation is an inevitable outcome of growth. As businesses grow, as categories grow, there are going to be smaller, more inefficient players that die down. To his point that there were 8 telecom players, I mean, the reality is a few of them, 4 or 5 have died out. That's a reality. However, he's right to the extent that if we have just a 2 or a 3-player market, which is really where we are today, then there's a danger of them colluding, in a manner of speaking, to make things difficult for the consumer. And like I warned again in aviation, we largely have 2 groups that control about 90% of the Indian aviation market. Now, not to say that either of them is price colluding, but there are sectors where there is monopolies. There are certain flight paths where only one of these 2 big groups fly, and you can see that there's completely crazy pricing. So I think that is a worry, ensuring a level playing field, ensuring that we have enough adequate competitors, but at the same time not restricting businesses what they can and cannot do. Eventually, the business of government is to keep out of businesses as long as they ensure a level playing field and fair regulatory practices.
As far as level playing field where everyone has equal access to capital for one, Lloyd, I want to ask you, because Mitali raised that point as well, just how much access to capital have our startups had in recent times, according to you? And has that been, in a sense, equitable, where everyone has an equal opportunity and it has been fairly available as well? Because Rahul Gandhi in his article itself mentions a whole host of companies that have come up in a big way in recent times, and he says they've played by the rules.
Starting with Lenskart, Zomato, etc. I would say that startups in India have never had it so good as they've had in the last 10 years. And that's largely because of a lot of private capital. Risk capital has now become easier to get. A young entrepreneur can actually stand up, pitch his idea in front of a few angel networks, get some money. That's been usually positive. However, within that, there is a sense of inequity, right? Mitali rightly pointed out that maybe women entrepreneurs haven't got their share of the startup pie, and that's a big worry. So there are the relative inequities that exist. Where there is a bigger problem, and I think that points to the large unemployment in the country, is that the small and micro enterprises haven't got their share of, despite the Mudra loans, the reality is a lot of them don't have access to capital, right? While Mudra loans are great to announce, great headline, I think the real amount of money that goes down to the small and is questionable. I know national banks have targets for their managers about the amount of small and micro enterprises, but it's the credit officer at the smallest branch level who's very wary about giving out these loans, because he knows very often the recovery is poor and that's going to impact his promotion. So I think we have a concern about the small micro enterprises that don't get enough of capital. And that's where the real growth in terms of employment will come from.
And Kapil Madan, just to come to you, if we were to agree with what Rahul Gandhi is saying, his views on Indian monopolies, the question is that we need a solid kind of solutions to the problem if it were. Rahul Gandhi is suggesting structural reforms for MSMEs. He's talking about simplified GST, better banking access. But you tell me, do we need to go further than that? I mean, there is one aspect of it which is about the feasibility of these reforms, but how much further do we need to go, according to you?
So Vikram, I think the first step in resolving any problem is acknowledging the problem. Now we are living in a times where we don't even acknowledge the issues. No, so I thank you for at least acknowledging.
Fair enough.
And our good panelist here, Mr. Lloyd, that he at least acknowledges, yes, there are some issues. There are some concerns. If we resolve these concerns, then only India can emerge as a superpower and as a country which have a socio-economic justice for all, which provides level playing field to all the players as except to few companies.
But as far as Rahul Gandhi and this published piece is concerned, it has raised several important points, like all of you on the panel agree. But the politics of it, of course, is something that is going to be in play. It will be as part of elections and outside of elections. And all of that needs to be taken in a holistic way. And that's what we started with. Smita Gupta, Lloyd Mathias, Kapil Madan, Mitali Nikore, thank you very much for joining us on this discussion here on India Tonight. We'll take a very quick breather now on the show. And on the flip side, of course, my colleague Samita Karir is joining us. And we'll discuss exactly what Trump brings to the table. Is he going to take care of Indian interests or not? What are the pros and cons of doing business with Donald Trump? That's coming up. Do stay with us.